And I didn't want to be pigeonholed into being that diversity person. And I've spoken to this a lot. A lot of times when there's very few like brown faces in the room, they become selected to be the like experts in diversity because they're the ones who are diverse. And that can be really exhausting.
Welcome to the Vet Life Reimagined podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories from all across the veterinary profession. Today, I have a fourth-year veterinary student, Ruth Goins, who is at school at the University of California, Davis. She is originally from Hopkins, Minnesota, and studied linguistics and archaeology at Harvard University, class of 2013. After graduating, she moved to San Francisco, California, to work for a small construction software startup called PlanGrid. During her time in tech, she decided to change careers and finally work towards getting her DVM. Ruth plans to move to Chicago after graduating in May of 2023 with her partner Nick and their two cats, Honey and Galaxy, as well as their dog, Ruth's first ever surgery patient, Brooke. She is interested in pursuing a career in emergency medicine. And in her free time, do vet students get free time? Ruth likes to cook, work out, read, and drink wine with friends. Diversity has been a particular interest for her, yet we discussed how she didn't want that to be her entire identity. I admire her deep self-awareness and wisdom that she shares for veterinary students and beyond. Let's get to the conversation. When did you know you wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
I think I have a pretty traditional interest in veterinary medicine. I wanted to be a vet when I was like 4 years old. I got my first cat when I was 4. And, she was one of those like tortured cats that lives with a small child. I would just pick her up under her arms and drag her around. And I had one of those like fake toy doctor kits, and I would listen to her heart and put my own bandages like on her fur. But yeah, it's something I always wanted to do even as a little kid.
Now you are currently in your fourth year at UC Davis.
Yep.
So going into veterinary school, did you have an idea of what you would want to do once you left vet school?
Yeah. So honestly, when I started vet school, I didn't know a ton about the vet industry. I just knew that I wanted a career working with animals and healing them and working with their owners. I was kind of naive. I'm a career change student. So I spent 7 years between my undergraduate time and vet school working. And I had no idea like the full spectrum of specialties and opportunities that vets can have, both like in a hospital and research in the industry. And so I came in thinking I was just going to do GP right off the bat, which I think is a great thing for people to do. During the pandemic, I worked at an emergency hospital in Walnut Creek in California, and I absolutely fell in love with emergency medicine. I just really liked how fast-paced it was. I liked how you could take this moment of great uncertainty and fear, both for the pet and for the client, and create like order and calm out of that. For the most part, I mean, obviously there are some sad endings to things, but there are also some really happy endings. And to be able to think on your feet like that and really organize everything to come up with a good solution was very intriguing to me. So now that's what I'm hoping to go into.
Oh, that's really exciting. And I think one of the reasons that Dr. Larimar also recommended that I bring you on the podcast was, one, he said you were a natural leader and a very excellent student. So you definitely stood out. But you were also a big part of a organization called Voice Veterinarians as One Inclusive Community for Empowerment. So I read an article that UC Davis wrote about you, and it actually went into a little bit about growing up in Minnesota. And they specifically said that you were one of the few mixed race families in your neighborhood. So did that impact you growing up? And did it influence your decision going into veterinary medicine?
Yeah, it definitely was something that I was at times overtly aware of growing up. I think, little kids are so innocent, and we have to be taught that, there are these perceived differences based on appearances or, certain ways that people are. But it would come to the surface, like certain times. And I think really my mom felt the brunt of that more. Both myself and my brother Well, myself, definitely. I look a lot more like my dad. I remember like one time my mom was like pushing my little brother and I in a stroller around the neighborhood, and someone like asked her like, "Oh, where did you adopt your children from?" She was like, "Well, I didn't, like they are my natural children." It just wasn't. I mean, I'm sure there are other biracial people in Minnesota, but the suburbs that I lived in, the schools I attended, it was very rare. But I was lucky enough to grow up with a group of friends and teachers that really honestly never even called it out for the most part. And so I would say that like my race or my identity has never really been something I consider when making life decisions. I think that people say, representation matters. If you don't see a lot of Black veterinarians, it's not inspiring for young Black children to become veterinarians. And I never really thought of it that way. But then I was joking with my boyfriend the other day that one of my favorite movies growing up was Eddie Murphy and Dr. Dolittle. So I was like, maybe that did influence me in some way. I have no idea if the movie has aged well either. It probably hasn't. I should go back and watch it. But yeah, it's my identities, whatever they are. I never have really thought, this is going to be a hindrance or this will be something that will make things easier for me. I've just kind of done what I've wanted to do and worked hard.
So back to the organization called Voice in vet school. I've actually not heard of that organization. So do you mind sharing a little bit more about the program and
Sure.
your involvement with it?
Yeah, so Voice was founded at Cornell in 2001. It was basically founded because the students who created it saw a gap in the curriculum of their vet school in terms of talking about topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they created this group as a way to augment the curriculum for the students there. After they founded it locally for Cornell, they realized that it was very important and popular there and should be brought, to all the vet schools around the US. So basically any vet school in the US can be a member of Voice. There are some membership requirements. They're pretty easy. If you are from a vet school that's not part of Voice, I recommend reaching out and seeing what you can do to get a club started. And it's basically a national organization that has local chapters at vet schools to put on both national and local events, programs, fundraising for charities, all centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I started out as the president of the UC Davis Voice when I was in my first year. And I had the pleasure of, growing that leadership board from a couple people to 9 people. We had monthly journal clubs. We had monthly big events. We often partnered with other clubs to, co-host events or speakers. We were supposed to have a diversity week. Unfortunately, it was 2020 and it was supposed to happen in April. So we haven't had one of those in a while just because the events have been restricted, but hopefully there will be one this year. And so Voice kind of streamlines that with some of the other clubs, the diversity focused clubs. But when I came to UC Davis, it was like the main diversity club on campus. And to be completely honest with you, at my old job in the tech industry in San Francisco, I was involved a lot in employee resource groups, these sort of grassroots employees diversity groups, both for women identifying employees and non-binary employees and employees of color. So because the tech industry is similar to vet med in those regards. And I didn't want to be pigeonholed into being that diversity person. And I've spoken to this a lot. A lot of times when there's very few brown faces in the room, they become selected to be the experts in diversity because they're the ones who are diverse. And that can be really exhausting because not only are those people dealing with the microaggressions, the othering on a much higher level than some other people might be, but then they also have to do this emotional labor of saying here's why you should care about diversity and just trying to get people interested in that. And so I really didn't want to end up in that position. So I actually applied to be the president of the Veterinary Business Management, VBMA, and I didn't get it. So I was walking around at the club fair that we have at UC Davis, and I saw it and I was like, well, I know I want to be involved because it's still a passion of mine, but I don't want that to be my whole thing. And now it's my whole thing. So here we are. And it's been fun and it's been very rewarding and it is taxing at times. But I think one of the nice things, especially about UC Davis, is people are very receptive and people genuinely do care, at least in my perspective. And after a year of serving as the president locally, I got elected to the National Voice Board as president. And I got to talk to a lot of other students at different colleges and really recognize that UC Davis is kind of leaps and bounds ahead of other places in terms of our DEI efforts. And so I feel very lucky to be where I am. I love California, but yeah, I do think that we have a long way to go, and that more people who aren't necessarily, the minority need to get involved in order to bring these issues to the forefront and get, make some actual lasting change.
Oh my goodness. I have so many questions off of that. First of all, I completely skipped over the 7 years you talked about in between before getting to vet school. So I want to circle back there. But you said something that I think is really important. And you said that you didn't want to be that diversity girl or that diversity person. And I think that's a good call about getting our identity trapped into maybe a certain area when that really isn't all of us. That's not all to us. We have multiple interests and passions. So I don't know if I kind of have like this open question, but can you speak more to that and how you felt and kind of where you had that watch out and how you kind of maybe stopped and explored what you did want for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, diversity issues are really important to me. And I'm kind of one of those homegrown, like diversity people. I don't, besides the job required, unconscious bias training, I've mostly just been learning as I go. But like I said, it's just after doing it in my previous career, there's so much effort that you put into trying to make change, which you perceive as so simple. Like, for example, like getting pronouns added to ID badges, like how difficult could that be? Or to intake forms. It's like, this is a simple change. And it takes you 6 months of just like being really persistent and really annoying. And it's exhausting. And, like you make people angry or frustrated with you. And I was just really sick of doing that. And I wanted to do something that, also would make me a bit more well-rounded in my extracurricular experience. But my problem was that nobody else was stepping up to do this at the time. And I felt like if I didn't, then there would always be sort of a vacancy in that position. And it's something that UC Davis needed and still needs, is someone from the student side to champion these issues. And luckily we have Voice now, we have Pride VMC. We just started an LVMA chapter. I think there's an AAVMC chapter now as well, the Asian American diversity group. And so it's great. It's growing. I kind of sat there for a while, and watched what would happen and realized that no one else was going to step up and do anything. I ended up I thought I would start small, but there was a lot of work to do. And I found that there were a lot of people who wanted to help. So that made it really easy to keep moving forward.
Let's circle back before I go down to, because I do want to be able to have you help other people know that maybe the best way we can help. Because I think that's such a good call out that we can't just say, oh, well, I'm a white male or, and so that's not my place. That's not fair. That's not true either. So I'm really curious to hear maybe what are some of the best ways that everybody can help. So it's not just one person that gets the burden. And I hate to call it a burden necessarily, but just having to be the only one that is constantly trying to influence these initiatives and changes. So let's go back to the time that you had before vet school, because you said since 4 years old you were interested in animals, and then you didn't go directly into an animal-based field. You actually got into the tech industry, which you worked at a tech startup, which I'm fascinated about. You keep saying that you also had some diversity roles there as well. So can you explain, how did you even get started with this company and what was your experience there?
Yeah, for sure. So in my undergrad, I got a double major in archaeology and linguistics, which was really cool and really fun, but not great in terms of finding a job straight out of college. And so I looked for a really long time, and I ended up just, starting to apply to basically anything entry level that was just these like very generic skill sets. Like, are you a strong writer? Can you talk on the phone to someone? And I applied to this company. At that time, they were 7 people. And so I got hired as their 8th person. It was called PlanGrid, and it's a construction technology startup. It was founded by a woman named Tracy Young, and she was a great role model for all of us. She, I think, was used to being one of the only women in the room. So when we came to her saying, technology, like the vet industry, is very homogenous, it's very white, it's very male dominated. And we said, we need these support groups for the employees that do not fit into those categories. She was on board with it. So I got hired as their 8th employee in 2013. We grew pretty quickly. I moved around a lot of different departments because at that point in time, everyone had to do everything. So it was a really fun, close-knit group of people. Like some of my genuine lifelong best friends are from that company. And, I think just several years into it, I found myself sitting at meetings. And at that point, we had gotten so big, I felt really removed from the actual product and the actual work that was being done with the product. And I just was thinking, I really wish I had a career where I felt like I was making a tangible difference. And always in the back of my mind was this thought that I wanted to be a veterinarian. But throughout college, I was really terrified of taking hard sciences, because when I was in high school, I obviously had to take them and they went fine. But generally speaking, it was something that I had to work a little harder on. And when I was younger, I thought, well, if I'm not going to be good at something the first time, like, why would I even try to do that thing? And something, I think maybe I just, was a bit more mature at that time, but something changed and I decided I wanted to try taking the scariest class I could think of, which was chemistry, inorganic chemistry. So I ended up taking that at UC Berkeley Extension. So at night, I took the lecture in the lab and I did okay. I love that Dean Larimore said I was an excellent student. I don't know if I would agree with that. I would say I'm a good student, but excellent is probably hyperbole. So I did okay. And then I was looking at, okay, like what do you have to take to get into vet school? Is this something I could do? And I started to plan out a schedule. And the most affirming moment to me was after I'd taken a couple of courses. I had never really mentioned this to anyone. I called my mom one day and I said, hey, I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been thinking a lot lately about, and then she cut me off and she goes, becoming a veterinarian? And I was like, okay, who knows you better than your mom, at least for me. And that was very affirming. And that was when I was like, all right, I'm going to at least go for it. So I just kept taking classes at night. I worked at a hospital in Oakland on the weekends to get all the hours that you need to apply. And then I applied to Davis and I got in. And it's like, I just have these moments walking down the hall sometime where I'm like, I can't believe this is my job and my responsibility for the day is to x-ray a turtle or something like that. Like, it's just, what a crazy life that's what I get to do every day. So I think it's given me a lot of perspective. I think there are a lot of my classmates who went straight through from undergrad and feel like they really have to be here. But I feel like I get to be here. And I think that's a nice perspective to have.
Hi, we'll be back with the second half of the show after this quick break. But first, I wanted to take a moment and thank you for listening to the Vet Life Reimagined podcast. If you're enjoying the show, the best way to support us is to leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps us to reach more listeners, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for listening. And now back to the episode. Going back to the comment about excellent student, I definitely don't think that the definition of excellent student is directly correlated to getting straight A's. So yes, I want other people to make sure that they get that as well, because there's so much that goes into, especially being a veterinary student. You got there, right? You're in vet school. You're there.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's another thing that comes with this perspective is I never anticipated getting straight A's in vet school. But I feel like I have a lot of friends in vet school who really do put themselves down for just their marks and their evaluations. But there's a lot of stuff that, I see some of my friends who maybe are in the middle of the pack and they're down on themselves about, getting a B on this test or a C on this test. And I'm like, well, I wish I could talk to clients like you do, or I wish I had the technical skills that you do. And it's stuff that's not really reflected in the NAVLE, for example, that will make them really good veterinarians in the future. And also, I have always been one of those people who prioritizes making memories and choosing a more balanced and fulfilled life than perhaps acing a test. The lowest grade I ever got on a test ever, what I took the Monday after I went to my friend's bachelorette party in LA. And if I had to go back and choose again, I would choose her bachelorette party every time. I had a great time and I'm never going to forget it. And I'm going to forget about that test, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, I think I just read that one of the veterinary schools, they have discontinued the requirement for the GRE. Wasn't that UC Davis?
Yeah, a lot of them actually are. Davis is one of the last ones to do it. I think early on in my conversation, even with Dean Larimore and some of the other administration, I said this is one thing that we should consider getting rid of in terms of creating a more diverse pipeline of people. The GRE is expensive. You have to study for it. It takes a long time to take. I think it's 4 hours. Not everybody can either afford that, take the time off of work. Maybe they have somebody, they're a caretaker to somebody and they can't find a sitter. Like, it's just another one of those things. And similar to like getting hours supervised by a veterinarian, I think we need to come up with a more like holistic approach to evaluating candidates for vet school. And right now, the way it's set up, or at least a couple of years ago, it's set up for people who can afford to apply, can afford to get all these requirements. Like myself, I'm in that bucket. I was lucky enough, I was privileged enough that I had the money to apply to take these classes, to take the GRE. I had time to, I don't have children, spend my weekends volunteering, not even getting paid, to do veterinary work. And that's a privilege, but not everybody is set up like that. And unfortunately, in this country, socioeconomics and, racial discrimination are inextricable. And so if we don't address one, we can't address the other.
And you can tell I'm old and out of the loop, but I'm just now hearing about the whole GRE thing. So what are the things that you would recommend if you could speak to, deans and admission committees? What things would you recommend that people actually look for in candidates that would actually make them good candidates to go through vet school and to become part of the veterinary field?
I think it's a hard question because you get a lot of applicants every year, and the amount of time it would require to evaluate each applicant to determine if they would be a good candidate or not, it would be unrealistic, So I understand why some of these things are in place. I understand why we look at GPA and why we look at, the GRE exam. I just think, to make some of these things optional, letters of recommendation, I think, are huge because you can get a letter of recommendation from your professors, from your managers at a job, even if it's not a veterinarian, somebody who can speak to your work ethic, to the way you problem solve, the way you interact with people. I think placing a higher emphasis on the letters of recommendation would be great, but it is a difficult question. And I'll be the first to admit, I really don't know what goes on behind the scenes in admission. I've never been a part of that process other than being the applicant. And so I don't want to overstep and say, here's all the things you're doing wrong and what you should do instead, because I honestly don't even know how it works past, what I myself personally have put into the application.
Very fair, very fair. And so that means next time I need to find someone who's on an admission committee and see what their challenges are.
Yeah.
Because I think we all need to kind of learn together about the process to, make it better. So
yeah, definitely.
All perspectives. So that's really good. So going back to you a little bit, you're interested in emergency medicine. What are you most excited about being in veterinary medicine?
Myself personally?
Yeah. What gets you excited about being in veterinary?
I'm just excited to be around animals all day. I just love them. I think it's really cool that we share our planet with these other creatures. And sometimes we're like, you're going to live in my house now. And they're like, okay. And it's just so cool to me. I think also studying archaeology, I studied some zoo archaeology and learned about, the origins of domestication and just how we've evolved together. It's just so fascinating to me. Sometimes I just look at my cat's tiny little head. I'm like, it's just so weird that you as this individual creature with sentience is living with me and we just kind of hang out together. I don't know. Maybe that sounds like really like out there and crazy, but I just think it's really fun to be around animals and it's almost like learning another language, you know, like how they interact and the signs that they give you and interpreting their behavior. It's very interesting to me. And of course I like talking to clients too, but it's just really fun to be around animals.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on especially now I love cats, but the evolution of how man and the dog have,
Mhm.
kind of domesticated together, I find totally fascinating. But yeah, the relationship between people and animals, I think, is just something really special that in the veterinary profession we get to witness. And I
Yeah.
think it is a gift. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's nice to be around, you know, like clients who are bringing their animals in because they really care, and you get to work together to help this like member of their family, you know, get better and go home eventually. So that's nice.
Also, being in the fourth year. So, what are some pieces of advice or encouragement that you give to people either trying to get into vet school or also going through vet school right now?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of already touched on some of it already with the, you know, you don't have to get straight A's. I just think it's easier said than done. Honestly, if I had gone straight into vet school from undergrad, I would be devastated at getting B's and C's. And now that I'm in my 30s, I'm like, it's fine. Um, but I know a lot of people in vet school struggle with imposter syndrome. It's probably a hot topic in a lot of wellness events at vet schools. And I would just say, I think it's really easy to get down on yourself and feel stupid in vet school. But you have to remember that you're here to learn and nobody's expecting you to know everything. And what I always tell myself when I make mistakes is that's literally why I am here. I'm here right now to make mistakes and to get feedback so that when I go out and practice, I can recognize, like, oh, this is what I did before. That was incorrect. I'm going to do it this way this time. Because you're in a safe space. You know, this is your chance to make mistakes, to fail, because that's how you learn and grow. So I think I've gotten a lot more forgiving of myself in vet school in terms of not doing something correctly the first time. So that's one thing I would say is, you know, this is your chance to fail. When you fail, you should be happy about it because it means you're learning something. And then in terms of imposter syndrome, I just encourage you to really look at and examine all of the hard work that you've put in to get to where you are now and understand that you are deserving of the spot that you have in vet school. You've put in the work and you've really shown that you are capable of it. Otherwise, you wouldn't get in. I think it's really easy to feel like you're faking it or something like that, but you're not. And the proof is that you are there doing the work.
And circling back, I promised I would. When it comes to helping with diversity, and we're kind of having a conversation around the veterinary medicine field, but this, I believe, can extend way beyond outside of the veterinary medicine field as well, so that it really isn't fair to have that responsibility put on a single individual. So how can we more broadly and collectively put forth effort to encourage more diversity?
That's a good question. It's difficult. This is ultimately like my question always in all of the diversity work I do, right? Is how do I get more people, especially people who have privilege, who have power, to care about these things and to champion them? And honestly, I think one of the main things you can do is lead by example. If you are an instructor, if you're a dean, if you're a leader in the industry, and someone is telling you these things are important to me, I think, you know, you should take that to heart. And if you make these changes and you stand up and start saying this is something we should care about, then other people will as well. So use your privilege, if you have it, to amplify those voices. I would also say, if there are questions about diversity or what you should be doing, don't necessarily always turn to that one person who's different and say, you know, like, what should we do? Do your own research, you know, talk to other people outside your organization, talk to other people at your level in the organization. So I think that's probably some of my advice I would have is do your own research. I would say this other phenomenon that I have witnessed a lot where people will say, especially people in the majority will say, like, well, you know, like, I want to give people their space to have these conversations. So like a lot of times if my voice events were underattended, and I would ask my friends like, oh, why, like, what about that event made you like not want to come? They'd say like, oh, I just didn't feel like it was like my place to be there. Like as a white woman, like I didn't think it was my space. I want to give space for these people. And it's like, you can give space by listening and sitting in the room and absorbing these thoughts and opinions and like suggestions, but you should still be there doing those things. It doesn't mean you have to avoid it entirely. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So it is a welcome space for everyone. Everyone needs to be there, present, listening, and being inclusive.
Yes. And that, especially in an industry like vet med, where it is predominantly white, there needs to be more white people in the room, like listening and asking questions and being genuinely curious and saying, I hear you. How can I best support you? How can I help? Rather than just saying like, oh, that's not my place to be in there at all. It is your place, and it needs to be your place if we're going to make any changes. So get in there.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's understanding that it is your place. It is all of our place to be in this room. Yeah, I like that. Well, before we go to our final 4 questions, is there anything else that's kind of on your heart, on your mind, pertaining others in the veterinary industry? I don't want to leave anything out.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Dean Larimore for suggesting me as a guest. I'm so honored that he thinks really highly of me. And this is my first podcast ever. So I was nervous and excited this morning, but I've had a really good time.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure it will not be your last. So hang tight. Thank you so much for being encouraging of your colleagues going through vet school. And I'm really excited for you. 4th year. It's fun and a little stressful. I know. So good for you. You'll be there before you know it. All right. So your final 4 questions. First one is, what is something people may get wrong about you?
Yeah. I actually was going through some of these with my classmate the other day, and at the same time, we came up with the same answers. I think I have like a pretty naturally unfriendly looking face, especially when I'm like deeply thinking. And so I think one misconception about me is that I'm actually like, I might be like mean or standoffish, but I don't think I am. So I think that would be one thing that people get wrong about me. I think I just have a little natural RBF.
I said the phrase resting stink face to someone, and they thought that was hilarious. And I was like, well, I didn't want to say the B word. So I was trying to think of a good word.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's me, especially when I'm thinking deeply, which at vet school is most of the time. So
exactly. Oh, that's a good one. Second is, what is a hidden talent or interest that you have?
Okay. So this is going to sound really weird. And I didn't know if people usually answer this like very seriously or not, but I don't think I'm a super serious person. So I'm going to give you my honest answer. And it's that I can eat a full meal and then exercise afterwards, and I don't feel a thing. I'm perfectly fine.
Nice. I actually do the same thing. So I work out. I'm a morning workout person.
Same, yeah.
And I actually eat quite a bit before I work out too. Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that.
Never affected me ever.
Good. I'm glad to find someone else who we're good eaters.
It's an unusual quality.
Third, what is something on your bucket list?
Oh, that's a good question. So this is great. It kind of does tie into diversity, but I come from a long line of pilots. My grandfather was actually a Tuskegee Airman in World War II. And my dad was a commercial airline pilot. So one of the things on my bucket list once I graduate and pay off my debt is I want to get my pilot's license.
Very cool. I think that is really neat because I love to travel so much. So I kind of correlate flying to like lots of travel. So and I love watching planes. Do you like watching planes too? Is that weird?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, not at all. I grew up like because my dad was a pilot and both my parents had their pilot's license. Like I was always like running around the airport hangars. And that's actually how I got my first cat. It was like a barn cat at an airport hangar, and she had kittens. And then they were like, "Do you want to take a kitten home?" And I was like, "Yes, I do."
Of course.
So lots of airplanes tied into my life.
Yeah. Well, that is fascinating. And the final question is, what is something that you are grateful for?
Oh, well, okay. I will tell you this. It's pretty sappy, but I took the Navly a little over a month ago, and I just had this moment where I was like sitting in my car beforehand and just thinking about like all of the work that I put in to get to that place, and like all of the people that have really supported me through that. And I got like really teary-eyed. So I think I would say I'm really grateful just for all of the love and support that my friends, my family, my classmates, my instructors, my mentors, my old boss have given me to get to this point. So that's what I'm thankful for.
This has been the Vet Life Reimagined podcast. Whether you are listening or watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please make sure you are subscribed to catch all these amazing people in our profession. Also, send this episode to someone you think who would appreciate it. Have a recommendation for someone who would be a good guest? Please reach out on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. There aren't that many Dr. Sprinkles. Until next time, Vet Lifers.